Chapter 4, Part G of Greener Than You Think. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore. Chapter 4, Part G. In all this confused rambling, I thought there might be a curious and interesting little observation about animal migration, if one could trust the accuracy of an imagination more romantic than factual, and I reduced it to some kind of coherence, and added it not only to my report for the Federal Disruptions Commission, but for the dispatches I found time to send in to the Intelligencer. I hardly suppose it is necessary to mention that by now my literary talents could no longer be denied or ignored, and that these items were not edited nor garbled, but appeared exactly as I had written them, boxed and double-leaded on page 1. Though the matter was really trivial, and in confessing it I don't mind admitting all of us are subject to petty vanities, I was gratified to notice too that LaFassisy had the discernment to realize how much the public appreciated my handling the news about the grass, for he advertised my contributions lavishly. In my news stories I could tell no less than the full truth, which was that the grass, after remaining patriotically dormant throughout the war, except for the spurt northward to destroy the remnants of the invading host, had once more set out upon the march. The loss of color I had pointed out to Joe was less apparent each day of our stay, as the old vividness revived with its renewed energy, and the sweet music which entranced him gave place to the familiar crackling, growing louder with each footed advance down the slope, culminating every so often in thunderous explosions. For down the 1,000-mile incline of the Mississippi Basin it was pouring with accelerating tempo, engulfing or driving everything before it. It was the old story of the creeping stolons, the stepped-up tangled mass, and the great towering bulk behind. The falling forward and then the continued headway. Once more the eastbound trains and highways clogged with refugees. My affairs not permitting a longer stay, I returned to New York, but I could not pry Joe from his preoccupation. "A.W.," he argued, "I be no more use to Consolidated Pemmican right now than ground glass in a ham sandwich. My backside might be in a swivel chair, but my soul would be right up here. It's Whitman translated visibly and tangibly, A.W. Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate round and round. Besides, you've got the old man now. He's worth more to you than I ever will be. He loves business. It's just like the army, without a doddering old general staff to pull him back every time he gets enthusiastic. If anyone else in my organization had talked like this, I would have fired him immediately. But I was sure down underneath his aesthetic poses and artistic pretensions, there was a foundation of good common sense inherited from the general. Give the boy his head, I thought. Let him stay here and rhapsodize till he gets sick of it. He'll come back the better executive for having got it out of his system. Also, as he himself pointed out, I had his father to rely on, and he was a man to whip up production if ever there was one. The chief purpose of my visit to the grass was, at least momentarily, a failure. There was little point sampling and analyzing the weed for its possible use as an ingredient in a food concentrate if it were impossible to set up a permanent place to gather and process it. I won't say I considered my time wasted, but its employment had not been profitable. But even immersed in the ever-expanding affairs of Consolidated Pemmican and Allied Industries, as we now called the parent company, I could not get away from the grass. Each hour's eastward thrust was reported in detail by an hysterical radio, and every day the newspapers printed maps showing the newly overrun territory. Once more the grass was the most prominent thought in men's minds, not only over the land of its being, but throughout the world. Scientists of every nationality studied it at first hand, and only strict laws and rigid searches by customs inspectors prevented the importation of specimens for dissection in their own laboratories. The formula of Miss Frances, now at length revealed in its entirety, was discussed by everyone. There was hardly a man, woman, or child who did not dream of finding some means to destroy or halt the grass, and thereby make of himself an unparalleled benefactor. A new crop of suggestions was harvested by the Intelligencer. In addition to the old, they included such expedients as re-inoculating the grass with a metamorphizer in the hope either of its cannibalistically feeding upon itself or becoming so infected with giantism as to blow up and burst. The failure of the experiment on the Russian steppes was ignored or forgotten by these contributors. Building barriers of dry ice, and the use of infrared lamps. One of the proposals which tickled the popular imagination was a plan for vast areas to be roofed and glass-enclosed giant greenhouses to offer refuge for mankind in the very teeth of the grass. Artesian wells could be sunk, it was argued, power harnessed to the tides of the sea and piped underground, the populace fed by means of concentrates or hydroponic farming. Everyone, except those in authority, the ones who would have to approve the expenditure of the vast sums necessary, thought there was something in the idea, but nothing was done about it. Many, believing physical means could be of little avail, suggested metaphysical ones, and these were always punctiliously printed by the Intelligencer. They ranged from disregarding the existence of the weed and carrying on ordinary life as though it presented no threat, through holding the correct thought, praying daily for its miraculous disappearance, preferably at a simultaneous moment, to reorganizing the spiritual concepts of the human totality. But even without the newspapers, George Thario would have kept me informed. Piteous, if not too comprehensive for small emotions, he wrote in a letter, only a little more intelligible than the stuff in his notebooks. Yesterday I stopped by a small farm, or ranch, as local grandiloquents, ever seeking purple justification, has it here. Sub-marginal land, the tabulating minds of government officials, spectacles precise on nosebridge, daily ration of X-lax, safe in briefcase, would have labeled it, sitting in expectant unease on hilltops, and the uncomfortable slopes between. Dry farming, the place illegally acquired from cattle range, more proper and more profitable, by Nestor Grandsire, surviving drought and dust storm, locust, weevil, and straying herds, feeding rachitic kids, dull women, and helpless men for half a century. The Farm Resettlement Administration would have moved them to fatter ground 100 times, but blindly obstinate they held to what was theirs and yet not theirs. In the front seat, the man and wife, and what remained of quick moments of drop-jawed ecstasy. In back, unwieldy chicken coop, slats patched with bits of apple box and wire, weathered gray. Astonished cocks crowing out of time and hens heads down. Hitched behind, the family cow, stiff-ribbed and empty-uddered. The grass, deaf lover, had seized the shack, its fingers curled the solid door, body pressed forward for joyful rape. The nesters don't look back, but pant ahead. The bumping of the car accommodates the cow. I've had to leave the lodge, of course, and spend my nights in a thin house with a roof shaped like 2 playing cards, with the misleading sign, in punishment crippled, half fallen from its support, "Tourists accommodated." If accommodation be empty spaces with mottos and porcelain piss-pots, then punishment was unrighteous. I shall move on soon, perhaps for the worse, since there is green now beneath the blue. If I can ever come away, I shall. But I'd not miss this gladiator show, this Richieri swing. Give my best to the old boy. Tell him I'd write direct, but family feeling makes it hard. Joe. I showed the letter to the General, expecting him perhaps to be annoyed by Joe's instability, but he merely said, "Boy shouldn't be wasting his talents. Put it in sound. Orchestrate it." Just as Joe's enthusiasm covered only one aspect of the grass, so his retreat from lodge to wayside hostel to city hotel embraced only a minute sector of the great advance. Neither moral nor brute force slowed the weed. It clutched the upper reaches of the Rio Grande and ran down its course to the Gulf of Mexico like quicksilver in a broken thermometer. It went through Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas. It nibbled at the forks of the Platte. It left behind the Great Salt Lake like a chipped diamond lost in an enormous